I'm going to do a little video on different tacks and some reflective ties. And I'm going to put some on this stump. I brought this piece of wood in from outside. And I'm going to put some different tacks on here just to show you the difference in how they reflect, as far as a white one and an orange one and a brown tack and a green tack. When you're tacking areas and you get into very limp brush or you get into vegetation, tall weeds, cattails, stuff where you can't put tacks in. You know, you can't put tacks in here because it's not big enough diameter to put a tack in it. So you have to use bread ties, reflective bread ties, and there are several companies that make those. So when you do use bread ties, I will also show you that you need to make sure you break off some branches, because a lot of times if you're prepping a location during post-season when there's no foliage on any of these branches, when you come back, if you're coming back when the foliage is actually on these branches, a lot of times these leaves will actually be in the way of the reflection of your reflective marker or even your tack. So even when you're putting tacks in trees, if there's branches hanging down or you see a branch that's not quite down to it, the summer growth is going to bring it down to it, and there's a chance that those leaves are going to cover up that tack from where you're going to be looking for it from your last tack. So all of that little details matter. And I think right now I'll just show you the different tacks first. You know, sometimes I see on public land, I see reflective tape, or not reflective tape, but flagging tape. I definitely do not suggest using flagging tape on public land. Everybody can follow flagging tape. This stuff just sticks out like a sore thumb. So if you're on public land and you're trying to keep a place to yourself, this is actually a waste of your money to do this, because it's, you know, people are going to follow it, and if your place sucks, they're obviously not going to hunt there, but if it's good, you may have company. Typically, if you're using flagging tape, your location's not going to be very good because you obviously don't know enough about hunting to not use flagging tape. This is another one. This is made by Allen. A lot of companies make these. These are just clip-on. You hang them on branches. But again, I don't like to use these because they're just, you can see these for a long, long ways in the daytime. And anything like flagging tape, you can see it in the daytime. These are easy to see in the daytime. So if you're trying to hide a location, this is definitely not what you want to use. If you're hunting on private land where you're not worried about anybody else following, you know, reflective markers to your locations, then you're fine. These work great. I mean, you can put these 40 yards away. And as long as you got, you know, any of these flashlights I just showed you, it'll reflect on this 40 yards away. These bright orange reflective markers. Those little flashlights. Now, if you get something like this, which is the exact same type of reflective marker as that one orange one I just showed you, this clips to branches as well. Got a little clip on the top, just like that one did. But this one's brown, and the brown does not reflect as far. The reflection back is not as far as on orange or on white. So this one's harder to see in the daytime. So this would be harder for other hunters to see because it's brown and it blends more into the woods than an orange or a white. Lots of companies make tacks. Allen, Primos, Hunter Specialties. White tacks definitely reflect the farthest. These are about $50 for $5, $4 or $5 for white reflective tacks. And these actually go into the face of the tree. You know, it's just a regular round push pin. Just like a tack, thumbtack with reflective on the front. So this is a white one. The white ones reflect the farthest, as you will see when I do the demo. HME makes pins too. HME makes several different colors of pins. HME makes these orange pins. Now, I don't typically use orange reflective tacks in trees because they're easy to see in the daytime. As long as they're easy to see in the daytime, if I'm going to use something easy to see in the daytime, I'm going to use a white one because it reflects farther than the orange one. So obviously I'm going to use the white one. But I do use the orange ones if I'm on private property marking locations, and I will actually use the white one as my main tack. So if I'm just following a pretty straight trail, I'll just use white tacks, period. But then if I get to a spot where I need to turn 45 degrees, or let's say I need to make a 45-degree turn to the right, Now I'm backwards for the camera, but I would have a white pin here, and then I'd put the orange pin 45 degrees above it to the right. If I needed to go 90 degrees to the right for my turn, I'd put it directly 90 degrees to the side of the white pin. So the white pin's my main pin, and wherever this is, the orange one is in conjunction with the white one, I know that's the direction and the angle I need to look with my flashlight for the next tack for my entry. So this is what I use anytime I need to change my route. I'm taking off at a different angle than pretty much a straight line. Orange tacks reflect pretty decent too. HME also makes a brown tack, a brown reflective tack. Now these hide in trees better than any tack I've ever used. They actually are harder to see in a tree than a green tack, than the green ones. But they don't reflect as far. So that means you have to use these more frequently in the trees. So you can't gap them as far. And that will depend on the flashlight that you're using. I always suggest whenever you get ready to tack a location to make sure you go out in the dark in your yard, see how far you can easily see that reflection back from your flashlight, and then that's the distance you want to keep. You don't want to go beyond that distance for tacking your route, because then, you know, when you're entering a location, you're entering a route, following a route in the dark in the morning, and you start missing tacks and you lose your route, you get extremely anxious, you start sweating, you think, I'm going to be late. A lot of negative things go through your mind. That's not a good thing. So you want to make sure you put plenty of tacks in the trees to easily follow a route and not get lost. And you also have to make sure that when you tack a location, just like I mentioned a few minutes ago, cut anything that could possibly grow over top of your reflection tack, or whatever marker you're using, so that by the time you go back, if you prep it in the spring, winter, whatever, and you go back when there's foliage on the trees, you don't want that foliage to be covered so you can't see it. Nothing positive ever happens when you lose track of your trail. I also always suggest marking your routes with onyx as well, because that way, if you are using tacks, which are much easier to follow than an onyx in the dark, you always have the onyx to fall back on to get back onto your tack route. So those are the tacks. White, these are the ones that are still available. White, orange from HME, and I believe brown from HME. You may have to call HME to get the brown ones, but I think they still make them. The green ones, their history, I still have a bunch of them, but I'm not selling any. Now another thing I have, and I've used these a lot, and I usually use these on brush, is reflective ties. Nothing more than a reflective bread tie. And there's lots of companies that make these. Now this particular one, when you peel these off, they have adhesive on the back. You can peel off one of these, and let's pretend my finger is a small twig. You'd put it around your finger, and then you would stick it to itself on the back side. So it'd basically be like that. And obviously you could put that around a small weed, vegetation, a cattail, piece of cattail, small twig, anything. But you want to make sure you put it to the side. That's going to want to stick to the side. You don't want it in front of you like that, because now it's in line with your flashlight, so you're not going to see it as well. So that has to go off to the side. This here is just a simple bread tie. So this one here, you just wrap around a branch and you'd twist it just like you would a bread tie. And then you'd make sure the tag ends are sticking out. Kind of like that. So those are the different options in tacks and reflective bread ties, adhesive reflective strips. You may have to search around online to find those a little bit, but they work absolutely phenomenally well. In fact, these reflect farther than the tacks because you got so much surface sticking out. But anyway, now I'm going to actually show you with a flashlight. I'm going to show you the difference on the visual distance and how much these tacks reflect in the dark. I'm also going to do this in the field. Right now, this is sort of replicating daytime. You can see those two orange carrot stick fishing rods with bait casters on them. You can see that little narrow strip of log sitting on top of it. And it's relatively easy to see that there's 2 tacks on the front facing of that piece of log. It's also relatively easy to notice that there's orange flagging tape on that twig. I've got a branch sticking up above it with leaves on it. So in the daytime, it's real easy to see. It's easy to see the orange tack. It's easy to see the white tack in the center. Also, if you notice on that branch sticking up out of that piece of log, there's an orange reflective marker that's relatively long down at the bottom. And that actually has a little open clasp pinch thing that you snap it onto a branch. That's easy to see in the daytime. Those little white reflective markers you can see in the daytime as well. Those would typically go on little flimsy branches or on vegetation, cattails, stuff like that. And it's super easy to see that flagging tape. On the right side of that white tack, there's also a brown tack. Now that brown tack was very difficult, if not impossible, to see when I had this zoomed out, like you're walking through the woods. But now you can see it because I zoomed in on it. Obviously, if you're walking right next to the tree, you're going to be able to see that. And that green tack next between the white and the orange is relatively easy to see now as well. But you could barely see those when I had it zoomed out. Like when you're walking through the woods and you see something, and it's at a distance, you're not going to notice it. It's also very easy to see those orange markers, just like we said. There's also a brown marker in that tree, or on that twig. It's just above the orange one. Very hard to see in the daytime, but it does reflect very well at night. So if you're hunting public land, keep this in mind. You want to use tacks that are hard to see in the daytime, yet you can still see them at night. They won't reflect as far, so you have to put them closer together, but at least you'll have a reference and some tacks that people can't find and follow easily. I mean, they'd have to really, really work hard to follow a line of tacks that are brown, like that HME brown tack. Okay, here we go. First light I'm going to use is the little Browning, which is a 2 AAA light, and that's what I use. That's one of the 3 different lights I use for entries and exits. Now I've got my hand cupped over this light pretty well. All I need to do is enough to see my tacks and enough to see the ground. As soon as I hit my tacks, I go right back to the ground, and then when I get up to that tack, then I look for the next tack. But this is a 30 lumen light right here, and that's all I need. And that's as bright as it gets right there. That's a direct light. I don't have my hand cupped over it. Now this is a little coast light, 36 lumens, and it is very, very bright. Look at how light that is. The less light I show, the less odds of something seeing it and spooking in front of me. This is also a AAA flashlight. And I have my hand cupped over it right there. So I'm probably showing 10, possibly 15 lumens at the very most. And that's plenty enough to see the tacks that I have in front of me, plenty enough to see the ground in front of me to walk. I think this is a 150 to 200 lumen headlamp, and look at how bright that is. I mean, when you're walking through the woods, you're doing this. You're looking around, your head's doing this, and that light's going everywhere. And if you think deer can't see that, you really need to rethink your thought process. There's a 700 lumen light. Seriously, do you need daytime to walk through the woods? I could see this from 1.5 miles away with no problem in the dark if somebody was walking in the woods with no foliage. And deer can do the same thing. The plan is always to keep as low profile as possible. And this is definitely not low profile. Getting out of trees with a headlamp on with this much of a beam, you got to grab your backpack over here, your bow, your rope, you got to do all this stuff. You ought to be able to do that damn near in the dark without any light at all, because your eyes should have adjusted to the light. There's another one. There's another high lumen light headlamp. You don't need that much light. A reflective tack is so bright it looks like another light shining back at you. The lower profile you are on every aspect of all of your hunts, the more opportunities you're going to get in the long term. Little details like this where you're going to spook deer occasionally here and there, it's going to cost you opportunities. Okay, right now I have this camera on full zoom. I'm about 30 yards away, and I can easily, with my eyes, see a white tack in that pine tree, and the flagging tape on the left, and the orange clip-on reflective marker above the white tack. Okay, now I am 15 yards away, and I can see the white tack better. With my eyes, I can see that orange tack above the white tack, and I can obviously see the red clip-on. Now as I get closer, I'm probably 8 feet from this tree. Orange tack and the white tack are still easy to see. When I get up here really close, now I am literally 3 feet from this tree. But there is a brown clip-on reflective marker right there. Again, there's the green tack at 10 feet. You could hardly see it, if you could see it at all. Below that green tack is the orange tack, which you could easily see from a distance. Below that is a brown reflective marker. Now that you couldn't see until I have a hard time with my bare eyes seeing that brown tack right now, and I am probably 2.5 feet from that brown tack. So public land, those HME brown tacks, they don't reflect as far, but that is definitely, if you don't want people to find your locations, what you'd want to use. White tack, brown tack, orange tack, green tack. Also on these branches, I have reflective. One's a bread tie, one with the orange on it's a bread tie. You can tie those on so it reflects from both directions, and the other one is a reflective strip that's adhesive on one side. You strap that over the branch or around a vegetation, and it shines from both directions as well, because when you wrap it around, you stick it to the other side of the adhesive, so it shines from both directions. Okay, I showed these tacks earlier today in the daytime. I'm probably 15 yards, and I'm going to show them with my little 2 AAA flashlight right there. So you can see how bright that white one is. It's much brighter than the others, the white tack at the bottom. Then just above it, there's a brown tack, which is almost impossible to see in the tree in the daytime, so other people can't follow it. But at about 15 yards, I can still see that reflection with my little tiny AAA flashlight. Above that is an orange tack. And then above that's the green tack, which was also hard to see. The orange one and the white one are easy to see in the daytime. To the left is that clip-on brown reflective strip, and you can see that really well. Above that is the orange clip-on reflective strip, made by the same company. One's brown, one's orange. You can see the orange one in the daytime. That brown one, you can't even see it in the daytime. If you got it hanging up against a tree someplace, you can't see that thing unless you're 5 yards away from it. And then there's flagging tape. Obviously, flagging tape doesn't reflect, and flagging tape is just a huge, easy, simple thing to follow. And then over on that right side are the reflective bread ties. They're basically just things you can put on flimsy little branches or weeds or vegetation or cattails. When you clip those on branches or vegetation, you have to make sure, if you put them on in the spring, especially even with tacks, you got to make sure nothing's going to be covering it up when you go back in the fall. If you're going back, because stuff's going to grow, stuff's going to leaf out. So you got to make sure you trim it far enough back where when you're walking down your route that you can still see them. Foliage has not covered it up. So there's also a big difference in the reflective distance on tacks with the luminal light you use. So that, again, that is my tacks with the little flashlight, and I'm at about 20 yards, 18, 20 yards. Easily see all those tacks. And I'm not being really invasive with my entry because it's a 20 lumen light. versus using a headlamp like that. I mean, a headlamp, I could probably see that tack for 100 yards, but I don't need to see it that far. And I mean, look at how much I can see in that woods. It just shines up everything. It's actually funny to me that people use these things. It's actually ridiculous. Yeah, you can see a lot better, but you don't need to see that well. Many times I go in the woods, I don't even use the flashlight. If there's any semblance of starlight, you know, your eyes get acclimated to the light. So, but that's an individual thing, just like the type of light you use is individual. I'm just saying, if you're hunting in a pressured area, every detail matters, and this is without question one of them. It's actually a detail anywhere. This is going to cost you, using headlamps like this, big bright headlamps moving around with your head, is going to cost you opportunities, and you will never ever know it. I've had many deer run by me from people entering the woods, you know, a half a mile away. They come through the swamp and they run right by me because somebody's entering a half hour before daylight, and I'm sitting calm in my tree. I've had that happen many times. And I'm sure the people that spooked those deer had absolutely no clue they spooked them. Those deer just saw those lights coming. If interested, the links to many of the podcasts I've been on, or for information about my 2-day whitetail workshops that take place in March and April, please visit my website at deer-john.net. Thank you for watching another episode of Eberhart Outdoors, and to receive notifications for future videos, please subscribe.